how some of the signings, maybe some of the departures could impact this club in the 2022 season in terms of their breakout roster signings, whether it's offseason signings or rookies that are coming into the fold or re-signing of veterans. In terms of their draft, they have Hannah Belfort that they're going to be welcoming into the fold, the 37th pick in the 2021 draft out of Wake Forest. Midfielder Sam Coffey, midfielder out of PSU, 12th pick overall in the 2021 draft. And probably maybe the biggest one, I think, for you and I are agreeing on this one in terms of the signings that they're bringing into the fold was Hina Sugita, the Japanese international, not just only being this acquisition that they made in the offseason, but introducing her with a 3-year contract with the Portland Thorns, so longevity, with this player that they want to really continue to build with this club moving forward. In terms of detrimental, perhaps biggest losses from the roster, I mean, Portland's just like any other team, right, that entered this offseason. It was a ton of departures, some different farewells that they had to make. And that included with forwards Simone Charlie and Tyler Lucy to Angel City, defender Kristen Westphal to San Diego Wave, and the rights to forward Amir Ali to San Diego Wave FC. And that's all before something like the retirement of Angela Sela came into play, and then the eventual departure of Lindsay Horan on an 18-month loan to Olympique Lyonnais came into play. So, I mean, you're looking at the signings, the acquisitions, right, the additions compared to maybe some of the losses of this club, Lisa. What is standing out in terms of these two categories for you the most?
Well, looking at it honestly chronologically, how the news came out, how this went down with Portland Thorns, and even how we're talking about it, they signed a player like Hina Sugita before they lost and had some big losses in their midfield. She is a Japanese international midfielder. She's a young player. She's only 24 years old, but she has a lot of international experience, which I think she could provide a lot of depth for Portland in that midfield. She's a player, Sugita, that Karina LeBlanc and Coach Wilkinson said that they had their eye on for a while. And in the Portland system, they were keeping an eye on her, keeping track of her games, her international duties at the international level. She's played in youth World Cups. She was at the Tokyo 2020 Olympics and 2019 Women's World Cup. So she has so much experience at only 24 years old. So I think she will provide so much for them. She's their biggest signing for me, hands down. Just looking at the other players that they signed and that we talked about, they were college players that hopefully can make an impact and do big things in the league. But I think having a Japanese international in Sugita could bring a nice look for Portland that they need, especially in their midfield, because that takes me to the biggest losses that Portland suffered, and it's their midfield. There's Swiss cheese holes now in this midfield for Portland. You mentioned a number of different players: Simone Charlie, Tyler Lucy, Kristen Westphal. These are big players that played a big role for Portland last year. However, someone like a Simone Charlie, even a Tyler Lucy, they weren't the superstar strikers. It's not a Sophia Smith, even a Morgan Weaver. So these holes can be filled. But when you look at the midfield, in Angela Salem retiring, which was not a surprise. If you knew her, if you were her teammate, a lot of her Portland teammates saw this coming. She wanted one more season under her belt, a good season with Portland. And now she steps aside so she can focus on her other career. And then also Lindsay Horan, although she signed another deal with Portland Thorns, a contract extension, she is on loan for 18 months. So she is out of the picture for 2022 for Portland Thorns. So losing one of the best defensive fielders in NWSL in Angela Salem, and then losing one of the most creative playmakers in the attacking midfield position in Lindsay Horan, that's a really big hole to fill in the midfield for Portland. And I think Hina Sugita could provide some support in the midfield, but I don't think she can fill both of those holes left by Salem and Horan. So outweighing one versus the other, frankly, if that's what we're looking at, I think the loss is bigger for Portland in their midfield. And which players are going to step up, because they've relied on Salem for years to be the engine in the midfield and to be the one that makes those defensive stops, to start the play on offense. She's just been the destroyer, right? She was categorized as an MVP at the end of the 2021 season. And Also, Lindsey Horan, U.S. Women's National Team player. She's going over to get some Champions League experience, which is great for her game, but it does leave a lot of question marks at Portland. So I think the midfield is the biggest circle I'm putting on my whiteboard for Portland, and kind of saying, how can they work around this midfield? And that might change their projected finish at the end of 22 based on what they can do with the holes in midfield.
No, I'm with you 100% on that. I think the midfield for Portland is going to be the area in which a lot of people keep their eye on. Like, how's that middle third going to look moving forward in 2022? Especially, like you said, with somebody without a Salem in the mix. This was someone who really is retiring off of a season where she was nominated for MVP, and this is coming after a lengthy amount of time as a player in NWSL, and it took getting to a place like Portland to be able to play alongside other players to sort of continue help elevating your game, to kind of have this it almost felt like maybe, now I'm not referring to it as a breakout season by any means, because clearly it came during her last season of play, but it was almost like a bit of a reintroduction perhaps for people who kind of maybe forgot about the type of impact that a player like Salem could bring, because this is someone who made her arrival to Portland after the Boston Breakers folded, ceased operations, came through via, like in expansion draft, and had to also navigate injury, right? So it wasn't someone who was able to really maybe, make that type of significant impact in the ways that she really did if we center in on that 2021 season. And it didn't really matter who was kind of slotting in with and around her, right? Whether it was somebody like a Herrera, a Sinclair, a Rodriguez, right? Even we got to see at times a Moultrie sub in, right, for a player of that caliber. So I think there's a lot of questions surrounding that middle third for sure, and we're going to keep an eye on it